is Paris on Politics from Fox 32 Chicago.
Some opening shot thoughts. Trying to keep up with President Trump's social media is like trying to field line drives from 4 different batters at the same time. The hits come rapid and in all different directions. On Sunday evening, President Trump posted that as part of the, quote, largest mass deportation in the United States' history, quote, we must expand efforts to detain and deport illegals in America's largest cities like Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York. The president goes on to admit that politics is playing a big role in his thinking. Quote, these and other such cities are the core of the Democrat power center, where they use illegal aliens to expand their voter base, cheat in elections, and grow the welfare state, robbing good-paying jobs and benefits from hard-working American citizens. Now, there is no evidence illegals are voting or helping anyone cheat in any election. But the president, in his effort at what he says is historic deportation totals, decides to ignore the millions upon millions of undocumented residents that live in red states. According to statistics from the Department of Homeland Security, as of 2022, the states with the highest number of undocumented residents are California with 2.6 million, Texas with 2 million, and Florida with around 600,000. So what did states 2 and 3 have in common? They have Republican governors and Republican majorities in both state houses and Congress. But for some reason, the president doesn't mention ramping up deportation efforts there. His defenders say it's because the blue states have sanctuary laws that supposedly make it more difficult for ICE to detain and deport, which is why the subtext of the president's social media post is important and leads one to believe his aim is more political than practical, to inflame tensions in blue cities and states while protecting red ones. Without question, sanctuary laws are controversial and deserve debate. But that debate will have to be resolved in the courts or at the ballot box. A president who chooses to carry out law enforcement actions solely based upon political affiliation is one who doesn't seem serious about solving a problem as serious as illegal immigration.
Coming up on Paris on Politics.
Crisis in the Middle East. A report from the ground in Tel Aviv as Israel and Iran escalate tensions. Plus, will the United States get involved? President Trump holds his cards close.
We had a teen gathering on the lakefront that turned violent. A police officer wound up in the hospital because he was attacked.
Police department doesn't need a curfew to deal with criminal acts. They have the ability to do that today.
And curfew contention. Find out the fate of City Council's snap curfew ordinance.
This is Paris on Politics from Fox 32 Chicago.
America getting involved in this would be 100% to its detriment. The damage it would suffer would be much more than what Iran would possibly suffer.
That's the supreme leader of Iran right there. All eyes on the Middle East as tensions escalate and missiles fly between Israel and Iran. Back home, the debate rages over whether the United States should get involved. Earlier this afternoon, I spoke with Fox international correspondent Mike Tobin in Tel Aviv, and I asked him first the challenges of getting into the country.
Well, it was difficult getting in because they kept closing the airspace, not only over Israel, but in Jordan as well. So we were trying to fly into Amman, Jordan, then travel by ground across the Jordan River to get into Israel, but they kept canceling the flights. Even as I tried to get connecting flights into Doha, Qatar, I had the connector that was flying to Amman, and they wouldn't let me get on the plane. So I was actually stuck in Chicago for a while after the Operation Rising Lion started last Friday.
And I know, we've seen the images of missiles actually getting through the missile defense shield and causing damage and death. What is the sense that you're getting on the ground, and what is the tenor of the people there right now?
The tenor of the people right now is that they are definitely afraid of the missiles as they come in. These missiles that Iran has been firing, the Fajr rockets and other ordnance, are much more powerful than the kind of things that have been fired from Lebanon and from the Gaza Strip. There was one that hit very close to the U.S. consulate, which is about a mile off to my right now. And it was big enough that it blew out the windows in the U.S. consulate. And it took out really all of the windows for all the buildings for about a 3-block radius. has. So this is a kind of weapon that if you look at it, if it were to say hit some of the empty space behind me here, this whole area would be covered with shrapnel. So the people are heeding the warnings, and when the warnings go out, they all get close to a bomb shelter, and they do go inside. And that is why, despite the hundreds and hundreds of rockets that have been fired at Israel, you've got the multi-layers of the missile defenses, which have been very effective, but they're still not 100%. You're shooting a bullet with a bullet in mid-air when you're trying to knock these missiles out of the sky. So when the missiles do land, when they do get through the defenses, people are largely in the shelters, and you only have 24 people on the Israeli side who have been killed, which is sad, but it's quite remarkable.
And, you know, amid all this, you've got Ayatollah Khomeini basically putting out some statements, some cryptic statements saying be prepared for something big. How is that being received out there, and does your reporting tell you what exactly that might be?
I think the statements that you're getting out of the Grand Ayatollah really are more of those bellicose bravado statements that you tend to hear out of Arab leaders when their backs are pushed up against the wall. He's making these kind of statements, but then when he follows through with the threats, the one thing we have seen in recent days, that the number of rockets has decreased dramatically when these rocket attacks do come in. They went from hundreds of rockets to last night some 20 rockets were fired. Previously during the day, some of the attacks were as small as 2 rockets, according to the IDF. So he really can't deliver on the threat the way he's promising. It looks like most of his army has been crippled, and when he pulls out the ballistic missile launchers, he loses them. Israel says they've now taken out 40% of the missile launchers.
How long do you think this can go on? I mean, how many weapons does Iran have that they can continue to fire like this when obviously just a small percentage are going to break through?
Yeah, it calls for a little bit of speculation. You heard President Trump say, look for something big to happen next week. So that would lead you to indicate that this is only going to go on for a couple of weeks. But clearly, Israel has dominance in the skies. They say air superiority now, in that they have knocked out the Iranian air defenses to the point that they can really operate with impunity in the skies over Tehran without any risk that their fighters are going to get shot down. So the biggest challenge for Israel would be maintaining the targets, but they've had years and years to build the intelligence and pick those targets on the ground in Iran.
And I know that Prime Minister Netanyahu has been a bit cryptic about whether or not he does want to take out the Ayatollah. What is the sense there right now, whether or not they want to go for the jugular, so to speak?
Well, if you talk to the Israeli man on the street, they'll say, go ahead, go for the jugular and hit the Ayatollah and take the head off the snake, if you will. I think really when you start to get into world leaders and you talk about assassinations at the top of the food chain, the world leaders themselves, their knees start to knock, and they don't want to go down that path because you open up a threat to them themselves if you start talking about taking out the leaders themselves.
All right, international correspondent Mike Tobin, live from Tel Aviv. Thanks for joining us, Mike, and please stay safe out there, and hope to talk to you again soon.
You got it. My pleasure.
And now joining me to break all of this down is Matteo Farzaneh, professor and chair of the history department at Northeastern Illinois University, Cecile Shea with the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and Ibrahim Abu Sharif, associate professor at Northwestern University. Thank you all for being here to help us make sense of this. Matteo, do you believe Iran is planning a larger retaliation than some of the missile strikes that we were talking about right there?
Iran is definitely planning to do something, but I'm not sure the capability is going to be there because they're constantly using the barrage of missiles that they've been producing for some time now. Iran is at a very difficult stage right now in this situation because obviously they've lost all control of their airspace. So it remains to be seen how much Israel will succeed in finding where these missiles are and whether or not they're going to be accessible for them to destroy.
And that's the question, too, that a lot of folks are asking. Can Israel actually bomb a supposed nuclear program out of existence?
No, that is the answer. The U.S. might be able to, and that's really what Iran is worried about right now. The U.S. has very large bunker buster bombs that have not been used on a mountain, which is basically where one of the key sites for Israel's operation is located. So I imagine what the military has told President Trump is they have these bombs, but A, they don't really know how they would work in the real world. B, there would be massive civilian casualties, and C, we don't know what's in that mountain. If there is fissile material in there, you know, there could be a fallout problem. So it's not something that anybody wants to do, and I would say it's not something President Trump wants to do. I really think he wants a ceasefire, and that a lot of his bellicosity is to try to pressure Iran to come to the table, and I think he'd be ready to make a deal with them.
And this is, he kind of, you know, telegraphs what he wants on social media, saying he wants them to come to the table and make a deal. But do you think that that's possible given the escalated situation now?
Well, I think it's more possible now than it was in the past because of the pressure points that are being applied by the military bombings and the destruction. However, I think diplomacy led by militarism is not the most effective way of doing things. The United States and Iran were in conversation. Iran is eager to have this isolation broken, and they're eager to get their funds that are frozen back, and they're eager for international trade. And so they were eager, they're ready. This put a wrinkle in the whole plan in this conversation. However, if we're just looking at the Iran in isolation, what's happening now in isolation, we're missing the larger point. For the last 25 years, the Western world has been saying Iran is 3 months away from a nuclear weapon. I mean, I don't think the media is interrogating that assumption enough. Like the Iraq War, the weapons of mass destruction, the yellow cake arguments.
I was going to say it sounds like deja vu a little bit.
It's a problem, but Iran is not Iraq. The Iranians will not. It'll be much more difficult to defeat.
And even the United States intelligence director Tulsi Gabbard said there is no intelligence that suggests that Iran is close to acquiring a nuclear weapon. But if Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel were to actually target the supreme leader in Iran, what would come after that?
I think the reviewers would be good to be notified or informed that nothing that the State of Israel has done in the past, historically speaking, or will be doing probably in the future, has been without the explicit permission of the United States and the green light that it gets. The viewers also should know when Saddam Hussein in 1980 attacked Iran, it just so happened that on that week, the American ambassador suddenly decided to go on vacation on all the cables that were coming in, that there is an imminent attack on Iran. They were just basically ignored. And she just comes back after a couple of weeks and says, we had no idea. Now the sources that are coming out and being declassified kind of points to something else. So I think it's important to know that State of Israel, as independent with the Constitution as it is for the Jewish people, cannot make decisions like that because the main protector, which is the United States and the American taxpayers, need to know anything that happens beforehand.
And you have President Trump basically saying, well, we may join in, we may not join in. What do you think the United States' role is going to be here? And do you think Netanyahu, with the blessing of the United States, might actually try for the supreme leader?
Well, so there's two things. One is, while I agree with you, in general, past leaders coordinated closely with the U.S. Bibi Netanyahu does not. And it was a frustration for Joe Biden, and it's been a frustration for the president. Now, the president is now hinting that he knew or that he supported this, but he was saying for weeks that he was opposed to Israel doing anything, and they were saying this behind the scenes very closely, and everyone in the Mideast believed he was saying this.
And according to some New York Times reporting, it sounds like because Netanyahu moved the ball forward, Trump just kind of jumped on.
He jumped on. He saw a way for himself to make some political points at home and perhaps to push Iran a little more, because he does think that Iran needs to stop its nuclear program. But to your point, you know, I'm not even sure what good would be done if the Ayatollah were to be taken out, frankly. And if there's one thing that Israel understands, it's Iran. Remember, it has a significant Iranian population inside Israel. Voice of Israel is listened to in Iran. As both of the other guests said, Israel just has excellent sources in Iran. And I think that the people around Netanyahu would tell him that the risks of taking out the Ayatollah in the countryside, where the Ayatollah is popular, would be too great. So I'm not sure that's something that even Netanyahu would want to do, and I don't think it's something Trump would think was a good idea. But as you pointed out earlier, everything that he says, you can't always know what he's going to say.
Well, we're going to have to monitor his Truth Social account. Right. But Ibrahim Abu-Shari, you were saying that Iran is not Iraq. But would there be a vacuum here of power that could spill out into a wider conflict and be dangerous for the United States as well as other countries.
Well, even without a vacuum, this is destabilizing for the region, and this is problematic, and because this region is a powder keg. There's a lot of frustration in a lot of Arab capitals right now, and even if you read past the bluster of the Arab leaders and Persian leaders, you have to understand that
we have to delineate Arab and Persian.
Yeah, we do. We have to do that. Of course, it's basic. And but the thing about taking out the leader here is we have to understand that he's a human being and he has a position as a religious leader, but he's also highly symbolic. If something happens, if Israelis do try to assassinate him and they succeed, this is going to open something Israelis I don't think they can handle. And so this is something you don't touch. And I think it's highly problematic. It's really boneheaded if this is part of the strategy.
I'd be curious part of the strategy too, Cecile Shea, looking in the broader context and these spheres of influence. What about Russia? What about China? What do they think of all this?
You know, I think that now that they look back at the last 50 years of history, I think they wish that the U.S. and the Soviet Union had done more to stop proliferation, which in the end is what we are trying to do here. I think that the U.S. involvement, the European involvement has been less about Israel, and it's been very much that we don't need another politically less than stable nuclear-armed country in the world. So I think that Russia quietly would prefer not to have a nuclearized Iran. They're not going to say that publicly. You know, China, it's certainly not in China's interest to have instability in a part of the world from which they get all of their oil. So I think that everyone would benefit from a ceasefire at this point. And just to climb onto what the professor was said, don't forget that taking out the Ayatollah would also destabilize Iraq. And that's the last thing that any of us need right now. Could destabilize Syria more than it's already destabilized, which would be saying something. So,
and that was going to be my question for you, Matteo. How destabilized would that entire region become?
Well, the point that our colleague was saying is very true. If you take out Ayatollah Khomeini, nothing's going to happen. There's somebody in the wings waiting to take the lead. But what will happen is that he is going to be made a martyr. He is going to be revered more, probably by average person that might not revere him right now. And that's going to be caused to be ever more so anti-Israeli or anti-American. So the feelings will be quite larger than it is right now. And also, I think it would be amiss for us not to mention that if Bibi Netanyahu aims at military or nuclear infrastructure, they're actually not doing that completely, because up to now, 9 nuclear scientists have been killed. There is over 224 innocent people that are killed. A children's hospital has been bombed. Schools are being bombed. And there's massive chaos right now in Tehran and all over Iran. And I think the public needs to know that. And
then we've seen this play out, unfortunately, already in Gaza and Palestine. My thanks to Matteo Farzaneh, Cecile Shea, and Ibrahim Abu Sharif. Thank you so much for helping us understand this. And up next, City Council greenlights a snap curfew proposal, but it's as good as gone once it reaches Mayor Johnson.